Well, hello again. And don't forget to put your name and the name of your business. I'm Eileen with LCIA, is the association arm of LCI Workers Comp. LCI Workers Comp has provided coverage for thousands of small and medium sized businesses across Louisiana, all the while delivering timely, competent customer service to both members and value agency partners for the past 35 years. The association was founded in 2008 with a goal to identify and meet the present and potential business needs for our members. For that, we are happy to have Marianne here and as well, sorry, with Urban Conservancy.
Good morning. I'm Marianne Miller, Stay Local Program Manager. We're happy to have y'all with us today. LCI and Stay Local are dedicated to helping our member businesses flourish through benefits like programs and services like today's webinar. The topic of business interruption is one we are familiar with, right? All of us, and especially at Stay Local, where we've provided support for businesses planning for interruption for years. We're dedicated to creating an environment where independent businesses throughout the greater New Orleans area can thrive through research that we conduct and educational events like this one. We're also very vocal to help educate consumers on the impact that choosing locally owned business has on our local economy. Stay Local is an initiative of the Urban Conservancy, a New Orleans-based nonprofit which catalyzes equitable policies and practices related to the urban built environment and a thriving local economy here in the greater New Orleans area. But what we do, we can't do without members' support. So we'd like you to consider that when you consider the support already provided from investor member businesses like Quality Site Work Materials, Brazil Sakshi Wilson, Parkway Po' Boy and Tavern, Stowe Law, St. Roch Market, and of course our co-presenter with today's event, LCI Workers Comp. I think Eileen is going to introduce our speaker.
You're muted, Eileen. Eileen, you're muted.
There we go. So sorry. So David has worked as a marine meteorologist for the National Weather Service for over 30 years, training forecasters, developing websites, testing instruments, and writing scientific papers. When he retired a decade ago, friends asked him to advise on evacuating during hurricane threats. So return to the weather business. He now publishes daily forecasts for his e-newsletter subscribers and posts educational YouTube videos. Take it away with that. And thank you so much for being with us, Mr. David.
Hey, I'll try to keep this brief because after all, gee, it sounds like I really want to run out and get one of those Parkway Po' Boys. Those are amazing. Then, hey, 12 years ago, Bill Belichick, the famous former coach of the New England Patriots, scheduled a press conference. Now, normally these are very dry, ho-hum affairs that are worth missing, but not this one. This one, Bill had a fire lit under him, and he went off big time. No, it wasn't against the referees. It wasn't against the fans. It was against the forecasters. He really called them nuts. He said he'd fire every darn one of them, okay? Because he thought their forecasts were bleep, and he didn't make any bones about it. Well, guess what? Fast forward to recently, the last year or two, and Major League Baseball, and they have a really different attitude about forecasts. They do things like move games up a couple hours, postpone them a few hours, sometimes even downright canceling them. And those actions don't incur the wrath of the fans or the franchises. So what's the difference? Why are there two different reactions going on in the sports business world, okay? And so we're going to explore that again. I'm a retired National Weather Service meteorologist. And we'll be exploring some businesses, bigger businesses that have used forecasts for years. We're going to talk a lot about local businesses that I've recently found out about through my forecasts who use the products. And I'll tell you how they're doing it, what they're doing it. We'll explore why they can do it, how the forecasts have improved tremendously through the years, why that has happened, why people still react the way that Bill unfortunately reacts, and talk a little bit about how can it affect your bottom line as well as your safety issues, and discuss sources for weather observations and forecasts. The one thing I'm not going to get much into is the climate change issue. And the reason is, meteorology is a big field, right? You don't go to a dentist and have the dentist solve every one of your problems, right? Most of the time, they're going to call in a specialist if you need work on your gums or bridges or something like that they can't do. Well, it's not my field, and also it's pretty irrelevant to making better business decisions about the weather for tomorrow, the next day, the next week, maybe the next month, okay? So we're really not going to get into that much at all. My background a little bit, raised in the New York City area, don't hold that against me. Got interested in weather at a young age because I watched TV weathermen up there who were really excellent communicators. Went to Penn State and then Florida State, eventually got my master's, got into weather service, and I realized, you know what? Nobody told me this. These forecasters, they work rotating shifts. No wonder why they're zombies. I mean, one week it's night shift, the next week it's day shift, and they don't know what time zone they're in. And I didn't want that for me. I didn't think I could survive. I wanted a family. I wanted to get involved in a church, a community. I didn't need that. So I got into support areas. Like I spent most of my career at the Data Buoy Center, doing a little bit of everything, okay? But in my retirement, I went back to my first love of forecasting, and now I produce a newsletter called Wound Up on Weather. And it's kind of interesting. I want to just show you my logo, and we'll get back onto the presentation for a second. But there's this nifty logo, and that happened because I gave a presentations to high schoolers using model tornadoes to teach them about the weather. And one artistic young lady happened to sketch this, who was my daughter's friend, and I retained it for years, and now I use that as the logo for the newsletter that I am putting out called Wound Up on Weather. Okay, let's go back to Bill, Grumpy Bill Belichick, okay? Why do some people react that way and are so down on forecasts? Well, first, they may not be aware of how much forecasts have improved through, I don't know, whatever time period you want through the last 30, 40, 50 years. Forecasts have even made amazing improvements in the last 10 or 12 since Grumpy Bill went off at that press conference. And the next thing is people have a lot of painful memories of big storms, maybe things that weren't forecast well that really did them in. Maybe usually it's the opposite. Usually forecasts of big storms that never materialize, cause people to evacuate, and they got into the auto accident, the dog wet the carpet in the motel, all these traumatic things, and they have this baggage that they run around with, and they interpret forecasts through a grid of past experiences like that. And so we're going to talk about maybe getting beyond that to take a look at what's going on in weather. And a lot of these people would be absolutely shocked to know that the private meteorology business has grown about 10% a year for the last decade. That's a significant long-term growth. And businesses tend not to spend money on frou-frou, stuff that's lagniappe, that's not going to do them any good, okay? So they're doing it for a reason. So part of the reason why people are down on meteorology, I think, is a lot of hype and a lot of overwarning. It's tough sometimes to get to the real forecast in a storm situation through all of the warnings. And it's like there's a blizzard of adjectives, adverbs, superlatives that people have to kind of peel away to find out, okay, what are they really saying? For example, we've had some storms recently that have hit the Lake Charles area, like Laura in 22, and there's been a couple others. And quite often we are on the fringe of that. But you might, if you just listen to the news and the tones of the voices that are on the media, and if you looked at the Weather Service official page, you might not pick it up unless you really carefully read for details, okay? For example, they would often put up like, a flash flood watch, a storm surge watch, and a lot of things up there. And they would use verbiage like, hey, we're going to have a storm surge of 3 feet or so in Lake Pontchartrain, which was a good forecast. But the thing is they pronounce it with the words life-threatening storm surge. Now, we're talking 3 feet, okay? I mean, to a toddler on a pier, it could be a problem, okay? It might tell you, hey, you need to tie up your boat a little differently. But the wording doesn't seem commensurate with the numerical value, okay? And people tune into this and they go, it's too much hype. So they turn everything off. I'm seeing a lot of that, okay? So let's look at some big businesses that have used forecasts for decades. Big businesses have been trained to sort through the emotions and the verbiage to get to the numbers that help them drive decisions in an objective manner. So they look at things like, let me go to my speech here to get the exact wording, or I'm going to screw this up. So they take a look at all this objectively look at the savings that could have happened if they had the proper forecast, as well as losses or missed opportunities if they acted on the forecast and it didn't happen. So they objectively crank all this stuff in and look at it on a day by day, storm by storm basis. And at first they were very skeptical, a lot of these big businesses. We'll try this for a while. And guess what? 40, 50 years later, they're still using it. Big businesses like Maersk, okay, with shipping. They use professional weather people and ocean people to route their ships across the Atlantic and the Pacific. They do this not only to save energy, because sometimes they can get to the other side of the pond 18 hours quicker, and that's a big savings to them, but also for safety to route them around storms. Ski resorts have long used forecasts to help them know exactly when to make snow, because if it's too dry, it doesn't work well. It doesn't come out right, okay? It's worse than the powder we had here on the North Shore with that snowstorm in January, okay? So they use it. Utility companies use forecasts of temperatures through the years to help drive their power production as well as their loading issues. And they do it with an increasing degree of accuracy. Some Mississippi barge lines use private forecasts to tell them what they think the water levels are going to be all the way up the Mississippi and Ohio, so they know, hey, am I going to have enough water to make this transit with this load of grain or whatever, 3-4 weeks from now. So there's a lot of that use has been going on for a long, long time. And I could go into other aspects of it. But what surprised me is that now small businesses, like many of you, you're catching on. I've run into 4 small businesses in particular that I want to cover. 3 of them I'm going to cover now that have used my products and tell me that, and first of all, this is kind of an accident, financially, you might think, what's this guy doing? And he looks like Methuselah. He's old as the hills. Why in the world is he? Yeah, why didn't he just take off on some big vacation somewhere? Well, this kind of happened by accident. I started putting out forecasts on Facebook, and people said, you're really good at this. I can't get this information in some of the other places. And so I found out, well, how do you use it? And all this stuff kept coming out. One of them was a Baskin and Robbins owner, okay? Now, here's what he does. He tries to order ice cream in big batches to save money every couple of 3 weeks, okay? But if he runs into a situation in the hurricane season where the tropical forecasts look threatening, it looks like it could be something here in the northern Gulf that could be a problem, he scales back because he doesn't want to lose because of spoilage, okay? And he found that through the years, I have saved him money by alerting them to that. You might wonder, how can you do that? I mean, geez, we can't tell. Well, guess what? There's cycles in the tropics of activity. Okay, about 30, 40 years ago, they started looking at satellite images and they discovered, you know what? Why are there all these thunderstorms in the Indian Ocean now? And the Atlantic is just like crickets. There's nothing going on anywhere. And then, next week it shifts over a little bit. And then the next week it's over here. And so there's these cycles that are related to upper air winds. It's called the Madden-Julian oscillation, and you may have seen it, somebody mention that in TV. And so you can kind of get an idea of, hey, we're going through a lull right now. And so he's using that for an economic advantage. Okay, another one is the Ace Hardware store owner that I own. Now, he's a guy who's got limited inventory on hand, okay? He's got a little bit of everything, but the key is a little bit, because he's not like the big box stores that have, acres of stuff and they start rolling the Halloween products out in August. He doles them out a little bit at a time, right? So he takes a look and he says, hey, if I see, and it takes him about 4 to 5 days to get his inventory from when he makes his order from the warehouse over near Mobile over to here. And so what he does is he says, hey, if I see, that we're potentially going to get a hurricane, of course, he does the traditional stuff, the tarps, the waters, the flashlights, the batteries, you name it. You've been through the drill. Freezing weather, pipe wrap, insulation heaters, dry spells, sprinklers, hoses. So he's got this routine of what he's looking for, but he's looking for the stuff like 5, 7, 10 days out ahead of time, if not longer. And forecasts have improved to the point where he can do that and save money. And it's great for public relations, for his customers too, because sometimes he's the only guy in town who has any of this left, okay? Then there's a roofer guy that I know. And he uses 5 to 10 day forecasts to schedule his big jobs. So these are the ones where, you're talking about a 5,000 square foot custom mansion and, wherever, or big commercial projects. And he has to be concerned about rain. And he wants to go for a couple of 3 days without any rain. So he looks ahead of time and he schedules those big ones for those windows. Until then, he does little small stuff like my home and gets those done on a faster turnaround basis, okay? So you can see how some local businesses have started to use the weather to their advantage. So how is this possible, okay? Let's talk about some of the improvements that have happened. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples. Then we're going to cut and look at some graphs, okay? Do you realize that today's forecast, okay, let me back up a second. Today, we have 7-day forecasts of temperature that are as accurate as the 1-day temperatures were in 1980. 7-day forecasts are as accurate as 1 day as were in 1980. Now, you won't hear this story very often. Why do I say that? I also happen to teach meteorology online for Liberty University, and I developed their course. And I looked at scads of textbooks about 4 or 5 years ago. And you would think this would be something that would be a success story that would be at least shared a few times, if not prominent, right? I mean, imagine if you go to medical textbooks, right? That they talk at least a little bit about only advances through the years. But no, meteorology, oh, this is unpredictable. It's just horribly unpredictable, you know? And oh, we just don't understand the great mysteries, and and oh my word, there could be some bad climate change, and we're responsible, and all these themes. But I keep looking for anybody sharing this success. No, not a word. Why not? I don't know. Okay, here's another one. About 90% of deadly tornadoes are warned an average now of 14 minutes ahead of time. And that's up for only 3 minutes in 1980. Now, that's directly attributable to the Doppler radars more than anything else. Another one, there's a private weather company that has improved their 24-hour probability of precipitation forecast in a 15-year period from up about 25% improvement, okay? And that ends, the last statistic I had on that was like almost 2020. I suspect, given what I've seen, it's continued to improve a bit since then. So there's been a lot of progress. Let's take one thing interesting is it's mostly happened in the Northern Hemisphere. I have Aussie friends, and they say whenever they come to the States, if we'll still let them in, and whenever they come to the States or to Europe, they're constantly amazed. You mean, gee, there's a 7-day forecast. And it was right. We can't do that in Australia. You know why? Australia's surrounded by all that water. Oh, look at the Southern Hemisphere. You got a couple pieces of land down there. And so you don't have the data sources that we have up here. That's just free. That's not going to help you get your business done, but it's fascinating. Let's take a look, see if I can share my screen. Can I share my screen here? Okay, here we go. Share. And okay, here we go. Here, this very complicated graphic shows you the trends in hurricane forecasting. Now, this is track error. In other words, how far are they off from where the storm actually is? At 24 hours, that's the red dots on the bottom. The 48 is the green, and so on, all the way to the top one, which is the blue one, which is the 120-hour forecast, okay? And notice that our 5-day forecasts now are down to about 150. Now, that's nautical miles. Today, it's 160, 170 regular miles. But that is approaching almost what, let's say, a day and a half forecast accuracy was back in 1990. Okay, so there's been a lot of forecasts and track improvement, especially at the long range. That's good news for advanced planning purposes, for people like my ice cream friend. Okay, what was I going to say? Yeah, so there's been a lot of improvement in this, and we'll talk about the reasons for that in just a second. But when you get into, let's see. Let's get down to the intensity. You will see that the trend lines are not quite as strong for the intensity. Okay, again, though, the intensity improvement the most is in the 5-day time frame, so that our forecasts there go from about 25 miles an hour in 2000 down to now about maybe 13 miles an hour. So we tend to be one category off, so to speak, in our intensities. These are harder to forecast, but still the trend is quite positive. And you might be in utter disbelief of this, but honest scout engines, this is really true. Okay. And again, it's if you look at the numbers and part your way through all the verbiage, you'll see there's a lot of improvements there. So that's the tendency with the hurricane forecast. Let me get out of this for a second. And everybody see me again? Basically, let's talk about some of the reasons why. And some of the reasons why have largely got to do with numerical weather prediction, something that some of you may not have heard of. You probably are aware of the models that they run, and we talk about it all the time during hurricane season. Guess what? They run those on a daily basis. And those models are physics-based, expressed in a lot of complicated collegiate math, okay? And they take supercomputers to run. This is why the government has been so prominently involved in this. In fact, this in meteorology is probably one of the best examples you're going to run into of a public-private partnership where the Weather Service has had to make some of these advances. I mean, AccuWeather is not going to put up a satellite, let's face it, okay? As good as they are, they don't have the capital to do something like that or to put in a Doppler radar network. So the government has taken the lead, but they have shared the data so freely with the private sectors and encouraged them to develop techniques, encourage them to develop instruments. It's been a great success story through the years, and we hope it continues that way. And then, by the way, it's so different than in Europe. In Europe, they're more like this, which is strange because you wouldn't think it would be that way. So at any rate, these models have done such a good job in improving the forecast from, say, 2 days out to about 15 days. And there's also novel ways of trying to improve the data. For example, the biggest problem we face right now is in getting data from over the oceans. Upper air data is so critical. That's the reason why forecasts still bust. Probably the biggest single reason why, whoa, how did we screw that one up after 3 or 4 or 5 days? Well, we didn't see something that came in off the Pacific because it came in from a data void area. But they're starting to chip away at the edges of that, doing things like using commercial plane winds and satellite data and stuff like that. So that's the reasons for the improvement. So what can you do about this? Let's take it down to the rubber meets the road. First thing I would do is this. Identify your most critical area. What area is going to kill or badly impact your operations the most? For example, with my roofer friend, it's not 1/100 of an inch of rain, okay? Rain, in other words, that's rain that kind of barely wets the ground. It's not that at all. It's when it gets like 1/10, 2/10 of an inch, that's when they got to really, when they see that coming, they want to tarp the roof up and move on, call it a day and tackle it later that day or maybe tomorrow, okay? So you need to figure that out. For most of you, it's probably obvious, okay? Then you need to plow past the warnings to get to the numbers and match a product to meet your needs. For example, for my roofer friend, it's not the Weather Service forecast because they give the probability of 1/100 of an inch of rain. That's rain to wet the ground. And there's a lot of times where you might see that. Like we might see that Easter Sunday afternoon here, but it's not going to stop the kids. Well, I might run them in for a minute to get a snack Sunday afternoon if we get it, but it's not going to be 1/10 of an inch. It's not going to affect my roofer friend, okay? So he needs to look beyond that to some product. And that's why people are increasingly turning to apps. because it's just the numbers. It's not a lot of warning this and verbiage that. And for example, let me share the screen again here. See if I can find something to share. Now this is probably going to look a little small to you on this one, but here we go. Here's an example of a type of an app, a time series plot, a weather at a glance is what you would call it, okay? That would have a curve of temperatures and precipitation. And the thing is you can look at the precip. Now I cut this off on this particular graphic. There's some like this one here. Hello. Did I get that right one? Well, there's some that they'll show you exactly how much rain those bars indicate. And that's the reason why Mr. Roofer finds this type of graphic more helpful than the Weather Service forecast, okay? And you can also see how the temperature is varying during the day. And for some people, a few, that's important as well. The next thing you might want to do is find a guru. You know, somebody that can help say, hey, most of the time I like that app, but today I don't. Or I think this app is great until this point, and then I disagree here. So, and again, you want to base that not necessarily, I think people tend to idolize TV meteorologists because they got that hurricane forecast right the last time, and never mind the rest of the year, you know? I mean, that one thing, you know, was the most important. I don't think business, usually big business, operates that way, okay? Again, because they remove the emotions from the objectivity, okay? And then the other issue I can bring up, well, before I do, let me talk about that graphic that I showed you a minute ago. That was by a company called Foreca. Actually, the parent company is Vaisala, and it's produced in Finland. Finland. You're going, why wouldn't you do that? Well, they use great European models, and I think it's more realistic in many cases than what I see coming out from America. But there are other apps for other purposes. And I'm going to close, I'm winding down here in the last couple of minutes here. One thing you want to do is if you have short-term weather needs. Okay. Before I do that, let me mention another guy. There's one other guy that has found my forecast helpful, and he's got an unusual case. He runs a tea room, okay? I think I can mention his name because everybody knows about the English tea room up in Covington. And this guy, Tim Blanchard, is a famous old Englishman. And he tells me that every time there's even a threat that a storm would come into the Gulf in the summer, his business goes down the tank completely. The phone could start ringing off the hook with all these cancellations. And so he does things like, you know, when he sees that about to happen, he tries to cut his orders down a bit and from food, and he may reduce his staffing hours and stuff like that. And so he's after the psychology more than the weather. He turns to me for the weather, but he actually looks at the media to see the hype brewing or about to brew. And then he says, okay, you know, or he may look at my forecast and say, hey, you know, I see this is going to come in or has a good chance of coming into the Gulf here in 3 or 4 days. And so he anticipates the hype. So it's a little different challenge there with him. Other things, short-term weather, totally different ballpark. Say you got people out in the field, you're concerned about lightning safety. There's some great apps there, like My Lightning Tracker is a phenomenal one for alerting you of, oh, you got lightning that's starting to hit the ground within 10 miles of here. Other products are really good in taking a radar and going out 10, 15, 20 minutes, half hour, an hour at its time. AccuWeather, I think, excels at that. I don't like their normal forecast, but for that, I think their product is great. If you're a mariner at sea, there's special apps for that called Windy, a very great product. Here's one everybody should know about that I'm really going to push, and it's called QRisk. And hey, there's going to be show notes to this, I hope, right? Where I can put in some of this information.
Sure.
This is QRISQ, and this is an app that you have to pay for, unfortunately, unless you live in Slidell. Somehow Slidell brokered a deal for their citizens on this. I don't know how you do that, but they did. And what it does is it predicts the storm surge you're going to get at your house, given the current hurricane, the official hurricane forecast. Because they'll run a surge model, they know your exact elevation. They know all the little, the little levees and stuff like that. And they factor all that in. And that's difficult for people to do. It's difficult for me to do. People call up and say, should I evacuate? And I go, I don't know. What's your elevation? No, you got any levees in the way? I mean, I don't know. They do. Really highly, highly recommend that. And so let me end on that and say I know there was one question that came in ahead of time on hurricanes. Can I address that now?
Sure. Yes, we had a question from Teddy, runs a staffing service. I think you probably have a different way to say it, but the way he wrote it was, what hurricane category is just too much? When is just too much?
I think that question is a loaded question. In fact, I could talk about that for the next hour. Can I? No, I want to do that. But seriously, okay, I think you have to break that apart. There's the surge question, because you can get a category 4 or 5 surge when a category 3 storm. That's what happened with Katrina. There's the wind question. Hey, can your structure take it? Okay. In the last storm, what was the one that went through St. Charles? The ice storm. That's how I remember them. What letter of the alphabet? That one had a lot of wind damage out there to structures in Kenner and Luling and places like that were not well constructed. So you got to look at that factor. And then there's the rainfall, how's your drainage, So like for me, okay, hey, I'm 12 and I'm not more than that. I'm 16 to 17 feet above sea level, 5 miles inland. So your average category 1 or 2 storm is probably not going to do it, but I'm going to use a product like QRisk to find out if I have a chance of getting my feet wet on that. If so, I'm I'm out of here, okay? The structure, I had a fortified roof put in. Highly, highly recommend that product. Really reduces the risk from high winds. I also, the last storm, took away my trees, okay? So that eliminated that danger, okay? So I'm not going to have a problem there, and I'm not going to have a problem with flooding because I'm on a little rise with great drainage. But you may not be, your answer there may depend on the pumps and the vagaries of running that system. So there's a lot of questions. Now in the city of New Orleans, your levees are designed to protect you to almost 30 feet. So you should be able to take just about any category 3. Beyond that, probably not. Does that kind of addresses that? And again, I don't think the question of, hey, are hurricanes getting stronger or more frequent is really terribly relevant to what you need to do with the next storm. Okay. But I could talk on that if you wanted, but I'm gonna see if there's something else more relevant.
I think the next question in the chat that Eileen asked was just this season. What are your general ways of describing the potential risk this season?
Okay. Well, I think I think that we are as a whole, we'll get less storms in the Gulf than last year. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we won't get the storm, you know? Generally, after years where the Gulf has been under the gun, it tends to shift eastward. And I think this year the East Coast has more of a threat than I've seen in a while. Part of that's based on patterns of sea surface temperature. Now, having said that, I think the chance if you wanted to do a Caribbean cruise this year, or you wanted to go snorkeling in Grand Cayman or Aruba or Cancun, you know what? This is the year to do it, because I think the Caribbean is going to see less activity. And I think we'll see less stuff coming up from the Caribbean for a couple of reasons. But I think the storms that we will be threatened with will either be homegrown in the Gulf of Mexico. These will have less time to develop. So the odds are that those ones won't be the really, really bad ones. But at the same time, those are short notice things. Those are challenging because they're ones we're going to say, you know, there could be a development. We got to watch this. And then all of a sudden the next morning it's developed, you know. And so that's the challenge. You don't have the lead time with those. And I think the other thing we have to be concerned about is stuff developing off of the Bahamas and cutting across Florida. We could see one of those, and that's the bad one. That's what we got to be concerned about. And I think there's a big difference east-west in the Gulf. I think those storms are more likely to hit the Panhandle, Florida, Mississippi, us, but not so much further west. And gee, those people in Lafayette to Lake Charles and beyond need a break, and I think they'll get it this year. Does that kind of help? That's my thinking so far. It's early. We'll see.
The site in the chat for those who want to sign up, and tell us a little bit, David, about what that experience is if you subscribe to your newsletter.
Yeah, well, what I do is 3 times a week, I put out a little summary, and I use those this type of Foreca graphic that I showed you a piece of a minute ago. And the reason why I want to do that is because, you know, I'm not going to be around 24/7. I don't have a Doppler on my dome here, okay? And so I want to give people a product that they can use independent of me. But at the same time, I comment on it and say, hey, here's the high points of what I see. Here's what I don't agree with. Or, hey, we're really confident in all of this because all the models are showing the same thing. And then I go beyond that and try to speculate about the next week. And sometimes I get into seasonal stuff, which I will for the hurricanes here shortly. And then I also provide Northwest Florida beach forecast for people heading over in that direction. So that's generally what I do in that newsletter. It's just an extension and an improvement over what I've been doing on Facebook for years. And, you know, it's free. I'm hoping to grow this into the thousands of subscriber range so that I can do local advertising and get some money in, because I do incur some expenses. For example, I pay money to a long-range forecaster who's really good in the 2-week, 3-week, 1-month time frame. And again, you got to recognize where to hold them and where to fold them, and I'm not as good in that area. So that's what I'm trying to do with it. And I'm always open for business people to come in and say, hey, you know, tell me how I can get the best info here. You know, I'd be happy to see if I can help them.
We appreciate that so much. That's great to hear. Does anyone else have a question? I think we saw a comment at some point about how helpful this information is for, you know, order timelines, people who are trying to back something out from a potential weather event or prediction. And so that was something I just wanted to acknowledge, David, because I know you talked about that, had talked about that earlier with us, that sometimes specific to a certain industry, just that, how much to have to reconfigure something that's coming through a supply chain is also something that is prominent for people with regard to weather.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with no more questions that we're hearing, just thank you again for providing this information. Thanks to all your neighbors who got you out of retirement, right? That's what you said.
Yeah,
They
I don't
wouldn't
know
leave
whether
you
my
alone.
wife agrees on that, but my biggest challenge is probably going to be I have a couple of weather friends, and I really would love to for them. Could you do this for 2 weeks while I take while I take a vacation somewhere? So if you want to pray for me, that's where you can pray for me for. Okay.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much. We're going to give everybody about 10 minutes back of their day. And you can use that to go look up some of these new tools. And we appreciate you so much for being out there and navigating all of this with us, right? We're in this together. Thanks so much from LCI Workers Comp and Stay Local and the Urban Conservancy. Have a great day.
Thank you.